Are there multiple paths to God? Can people believe just about anything they want to believe and still get to heaven? Isn't Christianity rather exclusive to be saying that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that the only way to get to heaven is through Jesus? Isn't that exclusive? Isn't that unfair? Well, today we're honored to have as our special guest Steven Garofalo. And Steven is the author of a book entitled All Roads Don't Lead to Heaven. He's also the founder of Reason for Truth Ministries. And it's our pleasure to have him as our guest. And in this interview, we're going to tackle those questions. So without further ado, here's Steven Garofalo. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be with you, and I am very, very excited to have our guest here today. And our guest is none other than Steven Garofalo, and he is the founder and head of Reason for Truth, and he is the author of All Roads Don't Lead to Heaven. And I am so excited to have him with us today. And so Steven, thank you for being here.
Brian, thank you for having me on your show. Appreciate that. I'm honored.
So, in your book at the very beginning, you take a shot at one of the most popular bumper stickers of all time. The bumper sticker that all of us have seen, and that's the coexist bumper sticker. So what is your beef with the coexist bumper sticker?
Well, my first beef, Brian, is it's pretty simple. It's basically because the bumper sticker is we already coexist. I mean, we do. And pretty much everyone coexists outside of, I would say, Islam. It's probably the only guy that doesn't play in the sandbox very well with the others. I'm not saying all Muslims do, because there are Muslims who are peaceful, for sure. It's just that Islam is not peaceful. Outside that, and you got a little bit of extreme Hinduism that does rear up and is rearing up in India, just because that's the Hindu is meaning, literally, the definition of Hinduism is religion of the Indies. So having said that, we've coexisted for thousands of years. I mean, it's just the way it is. But I guess my beef is, it's kind of like it says something other. What it's saying is that really all roads lead to heaven. It's saying, can't we all coexist? But I think really is certainly interpreted and probably meant in most cases, if not all, I would say all, but in most cases, certainly, it means religious pluralism, which means that the same, all religions lead to the same spiritual truth, as Barna would poll, which basically says the same spiritual truth, capital S, capital T, is God, right? So that's my beef. My beef is that all religions can't logically, can't biblically or scripturally, and can't in reality go to the same place. And that's my point of writing the book.
Well, I think Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and others have said over the years that more people have died because of religion than anything else, and so maybe some people that are using the coexist bumper sticker would say religions have not done a good job coexisting. But I think you already started to kind of address that. So do you believe that religion is the cause of most human suffering and violence in the world today?
Absolutely not. It depends on who you ask. If you ask your modern day philosophers, they'd say COVID-19 killed more people, right? You want to tell me that all of the literally millions of people, tens of millions of people that all the dictators killed didn't exceed what you could blame on religion? And then the other question is, really, what do you mean by that? That's the better question, is right. How are you quantifying that, and how are you blaming religion? Just because a culture has a religious background. By the way, every single culture has a religious undertone. Even China, by the way, is Buddhism. But if you know anything about Buddhism, Buddhism is really atheism at its core. And so it has its own beliefs. So would you say that that's the reason? I guess if you define it as that, I guess what you're saying is really what you believe is your worldview. You might also blame worldviews more than religions and say, well, all worldviews have caused a better way to word that. But to blame it, people murdering on Jesus, even if you were a Christian in those cases and you killed in the name of Christianity, doesn't mean that's what the Bible says. And be honest with you, that's true of any religion.
Right. So let me pause here then and just give everyone a chance to get to know you a little bit. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your ministry.
Oh, thanks, Brian. I moved from Washington, D.C. He was born in New York City. My father is from Sicily, a little town called Pozzallo, the southern tip. My mom is Sicilian from her grandparents from Marsala, so I'm very Italian, as you know. But I'm American. Born here, Brooklyn, New York, really raised in Washington, D.C., loved the United States of America. Moved in down to Charlotte in 1999 after I married my wife, Heather, and we have three beautiful children. And we went and started at Southern Evangelical Seminary in the year 2000 and got to know Dr. Geisler, and school was budding, and just incredible experience that has changed my mind, my heart, my life, my direction in mission.
Dr. Geisler wrote the foreword of your book, and tell us a little bit about his influence on you and his legacy on the Christian community.
His legacy is unquantifiable. His legacy is not in any organization, by the way. It's in his students, all of them, me included, amongst many others. That's where his legacy lies, and that's what he said in his own words. I studied underneath him for 19 years. He was my advisor, and he was my advisor at Southern Evangelical Seminary during my master's in apologetics training for 7 years. And he taught me really my first book, Right for You, But Not for Me, A Response to Moral Relativism. He spent about 6 months with me, heavy duty, and really, he was always teaching you. If you sat with Dr. Geisler and you're looking at a mouse on the floor, he'd be teaching you something about either the mouse or about running around on the floor. I mean, it's just what he did. He was the quintessential, in my opinion, greatest professor that I've ever experienced and seen. He taught you 3D, and his crowns are multiple, beyond measure, I think, in heaven. But he was my advisor, and so part of my mission is to honor him and train the trainer in handing off what I know to others. And I think that it's great that we have YouTube, we have technology, we have all the stuff that we're doing now. I can't say that there's a substitute for true good biblical and apologetic training by just just watching anything. You got to be careful about who and what you're watching, and how deep that source goes. And I don't say that from a pious position, but I say that from a position of, you don't get truth by just skimming the surface at 2 inches deep and watching a YouTube for 10 minutes. You really got to spend time if you really want to truly know the truth.
Dr. Geisler certainly was a brilliant man, and it is a true loss that the Lord. It's our loss, but his gain. The Lord took him home, recently, and I couldn't agree with you more that if you really want to get truth, it's going to take more than just a 10-minute YouTube video or a sound bite or just a bumper sticker type thing, And unfortunately, a lot of people just don't take the time to really study truth. You mentioned that you do apologetics, and so for the uninitiated, what does that mean? Does that mean we go around apologizing for being Christians? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which is just to simply give a defense of, and the quintessential verse, 1 Peter 3:15 is, all apologists, pretty much that's the mantra, which is be willing and be able to give a defense for what, or a response to the hope that lies within you, but then with gentleness and meekness, or gentleness and respect. Quite often, you have to be careful. It's apologetics can be academic. It could be more logical, because it is by nature. You're using logic and you're winning arguments. And, people's hearts are not logical creatures. They're more emotional driven, but doesn't mean that you take the head or the heart. You take both. So what we're doing is just bringing us back to defining truth, and really the truth of God, in giving evidence and good reasons for the Christian faith. And then we also have to be loving people. Those two things need to go together. But that's the whole focus of apologetics, is to bring back the logical head of understanding something can be true and it's knowable. And that's the existence of God and the true God in Jesus Christ.
Well, speaking of that, it kind of leads to my next question, and that's, your book, All Roads Don't Lead to Heaven. The title itself is inflammatory for a lot of people today,
Yes.
Especially in Western culture, where we want to coexist and we want to believe that truth is more or less relative, because I mean, even though I'm getting the sense that postmodernism is not nearly as popular in academic world circles today as it was, 50 years ago. But
Right.
in pop culture, in popular culture, postmodernism, I mean, we're bathed in postmodern thought, and in everyday people and everyday conversations and Hollywood and all that. So, how in the world can you say that all roads don't lead to heaven? How can you indict sincere men and women of different faith traditions like that?
Well, that's a big question, and I saw that that question's a common question, and that's pretty much read the book. You have to break that down. It starts
Yeah.
with truth. How is anything knowable, right? I mean, that's
Right.
and that's what leads you back to, how do we know all roads don't lead to heaven? Well, we seek to in the book to show why all roads or all religions or all gods don't lead to the same place, heaven. We do so historically. We do so biblically. We do so philosophically. We do so logically. That sounds technical, and we do so in reality, and we do so in truth. But we also don't. The book actually gives evidence as to why Christianity is the truth. And so we don't leave you there. It's not a book just on defense. That I would find that book to have limited value. So we actually show discovering God in the New Age, what makes this book very unique. Matter of fact, pastors love it. When pastors love your book, it's different than when theologians, apologists, or academics love your book. When they love your book, it's a good book. It's just that most people are not going to read it.
Well, it's a
Pastors
short
love,
book too. It's not a long book, so it's not
no,
like it's a
talk to Dr. Geisler about that. He said, yeah, because he was always a big book guy. He said, yeah, I know people aren't reading big books anymore.
yeah, yeah. I've got a couple of his big books.
Yeah, so do I. That I was rather forced at the academic point to read them, which is good. I'm glad I did because I went through a process that few really would put themselves through. Anybody, it's kind of like basic training, which that's my new book, but basic training, equip basic training and apologetics for evangelism. But, no one would say, I really look forward to basic training. I'm going to love to get up at 4:30 in the morning and get whooped up and have to run
Yeah,
20 miles. And I mean, but you
yeah.
do it because when you're done with it, you're fit, right? And then
Mhm.
from there, you know how to lead others to do the same. There you go.
A lot
But
of people, though, get very uh, apprehensive in our culture when people are talking like you're talking right now about how we start with truth and we use logic and reason and
mm,
we show that Christianity is the one true path. And a lot of people feel like, why can't you just leave people alone? Let people believe what they want to believe.
mhm.
And hasn't religion and in Christianity in particular used as a bludgeon to kind of beat people into submission? And I mean, you can look at that from an individual standpoint where maybe parents have abused their kids and beat them over the head with the Bible, maybe not literally, but at least proverbially, and haven't uh, uh, societies throughout history that have prided themselves on being Christian, been power hungry and power driven, and hasn't religion been used to get people to follow corrupt oligarchies and dictators and things like that? And so hasn't religion itself been abusive, and hasn't Christianity been used as that kind of a tool before?
Well, it's yes. Answer is yes. It has been, and it is. Go to parts of the former USSR, right? Even go to Russia. Churches are very welcome there. It's safe to be under the control of the state. The state wants to tell you what to do, and they're going to put in priests that pretty much pull the party line. So there's no freedom. Notice how here today, what's the biggest pushback with COVID-19 freedom? Well, churches are just meeting in cars.
Right.
You're not going to get sick with your car 6 feet away from somebody with your windows rolled up. So, but you're not sanctioned by the government, right? And
Yeah.
that's probably part. The state that we have, luckily, God's blessings to have multiple states, but you have places like that. I'm trying to think. There's another country come to mind, but there's a lot of countries. I mean, you look at China; they're tearing it down, and they're tearing it down in the name of what? Really, atheism, which is just another worldview from theism. And their main world, they love to, Buddhism is primarily a Chinese. That's really the place where it's the Chinese religion nationally. Technically, is Buddhism. Buddhism is again is atheism. So Same thing is true over the years and even present, that people will kill people in the name of Jesus. I mean, you have people that every once in a while will go kill an abortion doctor. It's wrong. Even if he's, in the name of self-defense of the baby, it's wrong to go out and proactively kill the doctor. You have to let the law carry that. And they'll say, I'm a Christian. Well, in that case, that's wrong. But does that happen every day? No. But you see the media a lot of times will see they go out and kill doctors. Well, how many of those have happened out of the millions of babies that have been murdered? So, yeah, is it an issue? Yeah. Is it a widespread issue? Not as much as you really think, and if at all. But, is it a power game? Listen, only when pastors manipulate people by fear, Brian, for personal gain or corporate gain, when one's heart is committed to wanting to see people enter in the salvific, grace of Jesus Christ, it's not. When people act out of religious piousness, economic power, or control, or other motives that are not Christian, yes, that's the answer in simple
But
forms.
you would agree though that there are a lot of pastors and churches and out there that are manipulating
Yes.
people, and so it's not isolated. I mean, there's a
No.
lot of corruption even in the Christian community. You would agree with that.
Yeah, I know. I would. I see what you're saying now. I was taking it more on an extreme level. Yeah, I would. And I would say, Brian, that today it's more economically driven. You see that, and it's more control power issue. But that doesn't mean the church is all like that. Your church, I know, is not like that. When you have a high level of, when you have a biblical model of the church, which is elder driven, your church, you have elders. So does mine. I go to Calvary Church here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Listen, the pastor has a lot of control, like the president, right? But at the end of the day, the elders and the congregation, which it's, you always have accountability in threes, is where the real power lies. So, if you get, and I've seen a pastor at our church get removed before. A lot of times pastors get removed for bad reasons because of gossiping and someone doesn't like the music or something to worship. So, but yes, do churches manipulate people? You really have to see if the word of God is being taught at your church. That's really the starting point for that. And then the second thing is to make sure that that not only that, but they have a biblical model. Now we have a very big church. Most people would know the name down here. And, the pastor lives on 19 acres in one of the most expensive areas in Charlotte, and he lives in a 16,000 square foot home. And I know people who go to church there, and I wouldn't give my time, talents, or money to that. And now let's just be fair, go to the church. It is really great worship music in one sense, but by the same token, the church uplifts the pastor. And, when you do the kids' coloring book, there's pastor. He's in one of the cartoons. I suppose, there's Apostle Paul. When you see things like that, that's the things, you can't drink the Kool-Aid. You got to move on to a different church. Even if the church is bigger or smaller than you want, the key to finding a good church is to make sure they adhere to the Bible and that they have a biblical model of leadership, which is pastor, head, a true accountable board of elders. And then you have the congregation that can vote any and all of them out.
Yeah, I'm confidentiality's sake won't go into detail on this, but I'm dealing with a situation right now in our church, and I actually emailed the elders just last night and said, this is how I'm handling the situation. This is what's going on. This is how I'm handling it. Just for accountability's sake, I want to make sure. I think that accountability is very important because you do have some churches where there is no accountability. I mean, it's like the pastor is basically the dictator of the church, and whatever, it's usually a him, whatever he says is it, and that's dangerous, when you have that. So yeah, I'm with you.
Absolutely. And you see that quite a bit. And so this church I was telling you about, the big one on the 16,000 square foot home, the point there was that, so they have advisors. So they're basically accountable to other mega church
right
leaders. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like me saying, well, I don't need a board at Reason for Truth by the way I have to by law, but I do so biblically because, my board they'll keep me accountable, just as your board would, and they are keeping me accountable. But just knowing they're there and can do that, I wouldn't want to disgrace God, but they've given their time. Wouldn't want to disrespect that. By the same token, it's great that they're there.
And
so
I can appreciate that board system that you're talking about, I can appreciate that with a church plant when, like when a church is sending someone out to plant a new church,
Yeah.
then there's no way to develop an accountability system with that new church right away. But the idea should be to cultivate leaders in that new church plan, so that new
Right.
church plan can have a healthy system of church governance
Yes.
there. It's interesting that a lot of evangelicals, and even we're in the Baptist tradition, both of us are very familiar with that tradition, and a lot of evangelicals will criticize other denominations that are very hierarchical.
Hmm.
But then in our own way, we will mimic some of those hierarchical structures, that
Yeah.
actually in some cases resemble more business models and corporate, CEO type arrangements than they do any kind of healthy church governance
Yeah.
in the Bible. So
And that's a
it's
whole nother
interesting.
discussion, is how the
It
structure
is,
of the
yeah.
church. And it unfortunately, the church has taken on more of a corporate model. But that goes back to the nature of truth, right? All roads
Yeah.
don't lead to heaven. If you stick with that, then you're not going to get off track. That's what the apostles and the disciples, fought. That, starting in the first century, the battle was to keep the gospel from being manipulated. And exactly when it is manipulated, not only people get not truth, which is false and lies, they get that omission of truth misleads them in everything that follows, not only their theology, but however else they see the world. But yeah,
Yeah.
you had asked me earlier the nature of truth. Really, didn't you ask me what it is and what it is
Well,
not?
that was going to be my next question. Actually, is kind of a two-parter, if you don't mind. We've been talking about the dysfunctionality of the Christian community and some of the corruption in the Christian world. And
Mm-hmm.
so someone that's hearing you that may not be part of the Christian faith and hearing you talk about how there's logical evidence for Christianity being true, and yet they look at the Christian community and they see the mess that's there, and they're like,
Yeah.
well, if it's so true, how come you Christians are such a mess? So that would be part one. Part two of that question is, and it's the age-old question from Pilate to Jesus: what is truth?
Yeah, it did. What was the first part again? Because was all
If
focused on it.
Christianity is true, how come Christians are such a mess? And
Yeah, well, that's a big question. I'm not
yeah,
going to answer that quickly because that's a whole podcast we could do on the other.
absolutely,
Christianity's Dr. Geisler, in a very quick answer, Dr. Geisler said, don't blame Christ or Christianity. He says in Christendom, as often we find dumb Christians or Christians acting dumb.
right.
It doesn't mean that Christianity's dumb, but that's the answer to the question is, and I agree with you. There's a lack of civility. There's
Yeah.
selfish ambition. It's amazing that I'll see it on levels today that I don't recall seeing it before. Everybody's a rock star. Everybody wants to be the man or the girl, or the man or the boy, the girl, whatever it is. That they want to be the person, the expert. The whole point is to give it away, but don't forget, some people have more than other people. If you have somebody who is just a mimicker, doesn't understand the information, then they tend to get a little bit more selfish ambition in relating into that. That's what I'm seeing. And so you're trying to pour into people, and that's a hard issue though. So Christendom, don't act dumb. Let's make sure that we represent Christ in the scriptures properly. Second part of that is what truth is. I write in my book that the nature of truth is what it is and what it is not. Now, there's three great enemies, and I write about this in my book. There's three great enemies, Brian, of absolute truth in our times: relativism, pluralism, and naturalism. And the first two, which are relativism and pluralism, these two deny the absolute and exclusive nature of truth. The last denies all supernatural truth, and all are fatal to Christianity. And you can read the book to speak more to that, but I will say, reality in layman terms that everyone can understand. First, truth is what corresponds to reality. It includes the fact that truth is transcultural. It means 2 + 2 = 4 for all people. I mean, if you're in Spanish, one of the Central South America, dos and dos equals cuatro, right? I mean, I don't care if Martians existed, this and this would still equal this, right?
Right.
So truth is what corresponds to reality. Secondly, truth is telling it as it really is what you were alluding to there. In John 18:38, Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? And this indicates, first of all, Pilate knew some truth. First of all, by, telling the screaming mob that he could find no fault in Jesus.
Right.
Remember, he washed his hands. Pilate was
Yeah.
telling it the way he is. He said, this guy's not basically guilty, but this is what you want. Every year I let a criminal go. Technically, but the blood's on your hand, telling it the way it is. This is a real problem today with political correctness. It's on everyone's on Donald Trump. Now, I'm not going to say right or wrong, but so the president gets up and calls it a Chinese virus because it came from China. Well, did it come from China? Is it originated in China? It's a Chinese virus. That's the truth. A lot of people say, well, that's kind of offensive. Probably not good international relations. I'll agree with that, Brian. But at the end of the day, it's not how you feel about it. Is it from China? Is it a Chinese virus? Okay. Anyways, you could debate the parsing out the words of that. I'm just making that a good example. People can't handle the truth today. And the bigger truth is they can't handle the truth about who, Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior. They can't handle the truth that morality is absolute based on God's words. They want sexual freedom. And when they mess up, they want to be able to get abortions at the tune of millions, tens of millions, because they want to live life on their terms. That's what it comes down to. But, okay, telling it is truth is, again, what corresponds to reality. Number one, truth is telling it like it really is. Number two, but number three is truth is what is. The earth is round. It kind of defeats relativism right there. It's not flat. Although, Brian, I do get pinged on occasion on my social media from the Flat Earth Society that they have figured out and they have evidence. And man, they go on these diatribes. I mean, these things are multiple pages. This evidence, scientific evidence that they have that the world is flat. And I'm like, man, we have moved past that. But you listen, truth is what is.
Haven't though. Yeah.
No, they haven't. It is not right. And here's the deal. There once was a time where the church promoted the fact, at least according to their belief, which was wrong, that the earth is flat. The church once said that. And, that's what everyone believed. So what changed? Did the earth change its shape? No. What changed is our understanding of the truth. See, God is truth and God doesn't change. Truth doesn't change. We just change once we figure out what truth is, if we want to accept it. Sometimes ideologically, quite often, we don't want to accept the truth. Why? Because, again, we can't handle it. It encroaches upon our human sin nature and our freedoms. But Jesus is the Son of God, not just a prophet. True.
How do we know that? Let me before we get specifics on that, is truth knowable? Because you just used the example that for centuries people believed the earth was flat, and many people still do today, sadly, but for centuries many people, including majority of Christians, believed the earth was flat, and they were wrong, but yet they were misled for centuries. People were born and died under a system of thought that the earth was flat. So is it possible that we're deluded in many ways today, including the nature of Jesus and the nature of our
right? I'm going to give a quick answer to that, but that is an epistemological question, which is just basically of knowing knowledge. What can we know about what can we know anything's true, right? I'm going to want to challenge you that let's bring that up on a future. I think it's a great future podcast to address that single question. Is truth knowable? But just to answer that question in short term, the way it is knowable is by first principles of logic. First principles of logic affirm this. And this sounds real technical. When I was in seminary, remember Paul Doyle's a good friend of mine. He's a chaplain here at the hospitals. And Paulie boy, I remember he got first principles of logic. Man, he did really good on it. I got Spinoza, which I hate philosophy in its formal form. I just do. I'm not a philosopher. I like philosophy, and so I thought Paul was the smartest guy in the world until I started studying and saying first principles of logic, everyone uses them. So, at the end of the day, if you're young, if you have a child that's 5 years old, go to them and say, put mommy next to him and daddy and says, is that your mommy and daddy? And you know what they're going to say? Yeah. Close your eyes. Is that your mommy and daddy? Yeah. Can that be your mommy and not your mommy at the same time? And the kid will look at you and go, you're crazy. I mean, they'll look at you like they won't even understand the question.
Right.
That's just right. Well, how do they know that? Because the law of identity, they know their parents. They know the way they speak to them. They know the way they hold them. They know the way their voice. They can know instinctively, just if their parents probably never said anything, by just holding them. They know their parents that intimately. It's called law of identity, right? And so there can be no two Steven Garofalo dads for my children. They're going to know the original dad, the father who fathered them on this earth. So, at the end of the day, first principles of logic, law of identity. I just talked about that. Everything has an identity. There can be no two identities that are exactly alike. You could say these two things are similar, and this all roads don't lead to heaven. But at the end of the day, you can't have two gods the same. There cannot be two Jesus. They can look exactly alike. And I give the example of a car. You could have two cars that come off the automotive plant right after another, the exact same specs, same color, everything. I guarantee you they're not exactly the same. I guarantee somewhere along there, the paint settled a little bit differently. You may not be able to tell it. Maybe a scratch in the bumper, because somebody walked by, didn't realize their zipper brushed up against it. It just is the way it is. Nothing's exactly the same. You can't have two exact same gods. If they were two exactly 100% the same, be one entity. That's the philosophical truth. Now, you also have the law of non-contradiction. Something can't be and not be at the same time. Jesus can't be the Son of God and be the Son of God. It's the law of excluded middle.
Right.
It's either he was a son of God or he's not son of God. There's no third alternative. That's how we can know. That's how we can discover truth. First principles of logic. Some people would like to say feeling, and that leads us to what I want to talk about next. I think is what truth is not, Brian, which is the second part of that. A lot of times you discover what is by what is not. And so that is a big part of how we discover the world. We can understand. I was watching TV news channel. It was a conservative channel. Tucker Carlson. It was amazing, and he put on this guy, and he wouldn't even say his name, but he got up. This guy's on national news, and he's actually saying, this whole COVID-19 is as much about your story and how you feel in your heart about things as it's in, and he's basically saying truth is defined by how you feel about it, which is nuts. Okay. Truth is not what makes us feel good. That's subjective. Feelings can be misleading, Brian. Truth is not cultural. It's right. It's transcultural. 2 + 2 = 4 for all cultures at all time. That's the truth. Truth is not invented. It's discovered. Even F-18 and all our new technology nothing's been invented. We've just discovered it. God knew it from eternity. He's eternal and he's omniscient. So truth is not what is comprehensible.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of controversial issues out there in the world today, and lots of opinions flying around. And you've addressed in this interview a lot of different issues that a lot of people have strong opinions on. How can people trust that you know the truth? It's like, and like you talked about Oprah Winfrey, for example, in your book, to get back to the real theme of your book. And Oprah says that, there's multiple paths to God,
right?
Paths to heaven. What makes her wrong and Steven Garofalo right?
Well, let me first, we'll come down and address Oprah, but let's go back and still say how we know something is right or wrong. How do we know something's right? That should be known to have the truth. Right and wrong prescript. Okay, here's where it is. Right and wrong, when I wrote my book, All Roads, Right for You, but Not for Me, A Response to Moral Relativism, the first thing Dr. Geisler told me to do is take out all treatments of truth. Because you see, what's right or wrong is ethical and morality. Ethics and morality are prescriptive, right? Like 10 Commandments. Thou shalt or thou shalt not.
Right.
Honor your parents. You shall do that. You shall not murder, commit adultery, covet, the whole bit, steal. So wrong is an ethical, right and wrong are ethical moral prescriptions. True and false are descriptive, right? You shall not murder, right? At the end of the day, did you murder that person? That's a true or false statement.
Right.
Say that's a descriptive statement. So the importance of the nature of truth is critical to all people, especially to the Christian, because Christianity is based on absolute truth and absolute truth of God. God is truth, and whatever is absolutely true is true for everyone, everywhere, at all times. Furthermore, Brian, Christianity claims that truth is really that which corresponds to the way things really are, as we just spoke about. So the Christian claim that God exists means that there really is an extra cosmic being, for the atheists especially, outside of the universe. And if we are unable to know the truth, then we're unable to discern the truth about God or differences between one religion or the other. Logic, as we spoke about, remember first principles of logic, we just addressed that, and critical thought are essential to human understanding of truth and reality. And truth is a foundation of knowing all other things. And by the way, just to go back and address those first logical laws, everybody uses them. When the relativist comes to the intersection of a busy street, whether he's in New York City or in small town USA, and there's a bunch of cars speeding down the road at 80 miles an hour, a bus coming, it's true for them as it's true for you and I that the person's, if they step out in the street and just keep walking, they're going to be flattened and probably killed, not murdered, but killed because of their So, that is really when leading up to Oprah. Oprah says, you see, she's getting into dealing with truth issues. And so my question is, you don't have to be an expert to speak about truth. You don't. You can be taught truth because everybody knows truth. But my first question is, who is Oprah that she has the credentials theologically and spiritually and religiously to make to utilize her platform of literally millions, if not hundreds of millions of people on this subject matter and consider it the N word? I would say that this is a problem with appealing to emotions. Remember, we talked about that. Postmodernism says feelings define the truth. Oprah bases her truth claims on emotion. If you feel good about something, it's true. If you don't feel good, it's not true. So, what training gives her the credibility, or what gives her the credibility at all? You don't have to listen. I would recommend you read All Roads Don't Lead to Heaven, Discovering God's New Age. That will really clarify that question. But logically, you can say that each religion has its own identity. And so I would say that Oprah defies and is self-defeating based on logic, because I would say most people would agree that Oprah is one of the most tolerant, inclusive people. Only problem is, I would submit that in the case of her saying that, she's extremely intolerant. And that's just not to single out Oprah, but in this case, she's being intolerant, I should say, because I like Oprah as a person. Mm-hmm. But Oprah is in being intolerant from the perspective that she's denying the Hindu their claim that they've got the truth. She has to deny the Muslim the fact that they claim they have the truth. She has to claim the Jew, the Christian, you name it, the animism in Africa, you name it. You even have to deny the Satanists. You have to deny them all. Some people say, well, that's good, you should deny it. Well, hold on a second. That's not the point. The point is you are culturally offensive to Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, atheists, you name it, because pluralism is an exclusive truth claim in and of itself. It says this is the exclusive way. You can't have one or two or three. So I would say that Oprah is definitely wrong in what she's thinking. As much as she's helped people in many human ways, her theology is definitely wrong. And, she used to, when she started off, I think she really started off really good. And I think she just, typical of all human beings, when you get that much power and money and influence, you tend to, and it happens, it's very difficult to handle that, Brian. You begin to think that you are the truth. You think of yourself as a mini God. I think that's what happened to Oprah, and I think it's what happens to a lot of people in Hollywood, in politics for that matter.
I talked about earlier, even in the Christian community, it can happen.
Even in the Christian community, you don't have to be famous and rich. You could be a YouTube star. You could be a not YouTube star and think that you're something. The key here is, which is a podcast I just did, is servanthood, is having a servant heart. Jesus, what did Jesus do? One of the famous characters, Hugh Hefner. I wrote about this in my new book, Equipped: Basic Training in Apologetics for Evangelism. Hugh Hefner actually stated in an article with Fox News, he says, I've met all the superstars except for one. It's Jesus Christ. He changed the face of the world, and I want to have a sit down with him. And I'm thinking to myself, when you're alive, you're going to have a sit down with him one way or the other. And sure enough, he's had that sit down with him.
Yes.
And, at the end of the day, though, we don't take Jesus, we don't take truth, we don't take God on our terms. You may think so. When I see politicians who act wrongfully, promote very ungodly things like abortion or abusing the whole COVID-19 financing. And then they turn around and say, hey, we're praying for the president, even though they mock him and go after the other.
Right.
I have to think, who are you praying to? And if you claiming to pray for the Jesus, again, you will have to sit down. We're all getting older. All of us are getting older. But that goes true for us. You and I sit in the pews. We could be a nobody in terms of the world. And the key is, what did Jesus do? He washed the feet of his disciples. We're called to be servant leaders. Servant leaders serve others. That's true leadership. Abuse of power is called totalitarianism.
Well, we would agree Jesus was a servant.
Yes, he was.
We would agree that he manifested love.
Yes.
And so wouldn't you agree that love is the highest truth? And if so, why would Christianity be so exclusive?
Yeah. Well, I would say that I would say that it's the highest form of love from the perspective that the cross is the highest point or perspective of Christianity, but that is basically out of God's love. So in a way, yes, I'll agree with you. It's out of God's love that he sent his only son,
right.
To die on the cross for our sins. And the only way it could happen for all time. So yes. And that's why Christianity is the truth. No other people, it's amazing how people will try to find truth or define the truth on their own. You can't do that. You have to come to God. He's very graceful. He's very, very loving.
But is it gracious and loving for an all-powerful God to send sincere people to hell who may have been raised in a different faith tradition than you and I, and they're sincere in their belief, they're not violent, they're peaceful, they're not trying to cause problems, they're sincere, yet they're devoted to the faith tradition that they know, and yet God's going to say, nope, you didn't check this box, you didn't believe the way that I want you to, so off the hell you go. Is that loving?
So it's loving for those who did accept Jesus and didn't reject him in that perspective, but it's justice. God has two sides to him, his love and his justice. They're both equal, by the way. His love is no greater in terms of his essence theologically than his justice. And we often in America, we have it so easy for so long. We just see God's love and that just trumps all things, and so God's justice is very real. But so an all-loving God, think about it as a parent. When you love your child, you discipline them. The more that you discipline them rightfully, it's because out of your love. It takes your energy. It takes sometimes, your emotional energy, your physical energy. It's easy to let your kids just run wild. My mom was a great example of that. She was just as loving, Brian, as she was just. You didn't play with my mom, man. She was Sicilian, bad to the bone mama. That after, and then she'd, but an hour later, she'd give you a hug and a kiss and say, I love you. No, don't do it again. You're going to get it again. And I understood that language. But why is Christianity exclusive? Just because the vast majority of people in India believe that Hindu faith doesn't make it true, Brian, doesn't make Hinduism truth, or that it is the truth. Just because the majority of Americans believe themselves as Christian doesn't make Christianity the truth. And, Jesus proclaimed that he is the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. Jesus answered, I'm the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, in John 14:6. And in verse 7, Jesus goes on to proclaim that he is God. And if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him in Jesus Christ. John 14:7. And Jesus said that by seeing him, they have seen God. That's the Father. That is he, and Jesus is the truth. This leads us to look at really what the Bible says about, God and being the truth, which leads us really, those who have never heard, of the Christian faith or Jesus. Good example, you and I were talking about this, the Ethiopian eunuch is my favorite example. Acts 8:26-40. You can read that story. What does God do? He sends Philip, and he commands Philip, rise up, he says, and go to the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. Now, notice how God didn't give him all the details, up front. He just said, hey, go on this. And you see this with missionaries. You hear this story over and over. Why did he send why did he send this Philip there? So the Ethiopian eunuch was, by the way, a court official. He was assistant to Candace, the queen, and simply his job was really, he was a CFO of her wealth. So he's going in this caravan. Well, it doesn't talk about the caravan, but culturally, if he was going on those roads with that much money, he probably would have been part of a caravan that was moving along. And that's an interesting. I was looking at this verse some months ago, last summer. And so the queen's treasure, he's looks over that. And what is he doing? He's being carried along. And what happens? He pulls up, and what is the eunuch, the Ethiopian eunuch doing? He's actually reading Isaiah. He's reading the word of God. And God commanded Philip to go over and join the chariot. And verse 29, Philip obeyed and shared the truth of Christ in the story. You can read the story for yourself, but the bottom line is, he says to Philip, he says to him, I get it, but I don't really understand if no one's to explain it to me. That's what he says to Philip. And Philip says, well, that's what I'm here for. And he explains it to him. And then what does the eunuch do? He says, man, hold on a second. What's holding me back from being baptized? He pulls the chariot off the side, finds a stream, and what happens? Philip baptizes them, and he goes away joyful. I mean, the human mind and emotions, Brian, often seek the path of least resistance when we're seeking God. There's limitless options for choosing a God to follow. You see the eunuch here. The bottom line is, God is going to show up. He's going to show up big if you ask him to. I went on a missions trip to Romania, and I asked a girl, she was my guide, and her name was Camelia. And I said, Camelia, how did you come to know Jesus? She said, I was doing a book report in Romania when it was under communist rule. The Bible was illegal, but she read it as in high school, just as a textbook. She says, she got saved just from reading it. So God shows up. What I think is going on in the Middle East is very interesting, where you completely close off Christianity. And it's very difficult to even get missionaries in there in many countries in the Middle East. Jesus is showing up in dreams. And I think it's true. I think he is. I think he's showing up in dreams. And I think that's, you can't keep Jesus out. So whether it's in a dream, whether God sends a missionary, I've heard, watched a great film in one of my first classes in seminary. And, they were eating each other, cannibalism and witch doctors. And they said, we knew there was a story of a big boat. We knew there was a God that would send, basically someone, his son, they knew the basic sheddings. It was in their heart what they knew, but they said, you've clarified really what we knew already. Why? Because God, when you seek him, will send somebody to clarify the truth. And then you have a choice to reject or accept him. And one of the problems with so many youth leaving the church today is a simple fact that people today, they have too many choices for pleasure. That is, if kids had to work their way through college and really had to focus not on partying and living life for strict pleasure. And by the way, adults too, that's perhaps what this COVID-19 is designed to bring some, at least not brought on by God. I don't believe God can do evil, but allowed by God to bring some sobriety and a pause for us to get our heads on right. We talked about this in the past podcasts, is you had people playing football for $30 million a year. Really? And you got a school teacher squeaking by on $35,000 a year. You got a problem there. There's a problem in culture. But at the end of the day, Brian, there are limitless options in choosing a God to follow.
Well, I think you and I would agree that neither of us are claiming to be prophets. And so neither of us are going to presume to say that God brought this because of X, Y, or Z. But yet both of us agree that God allowed this pandemic to occur and can redeem and use it, for his purposes. And one of those purposes is a wake-up call. I think, it's like, it gets people to pause and reflect on what's most important in life. Couldn't agree with you more on that. I also want to just emphasize for our viewers that the point you're making is that God's going to show up for the people that God needs to show up for, and that God knows, nothing escapes God's notice, and no one escapes God's notice. And so it's not like God's going to make some mistakes and forget about so-and-so over here who really needs to hear the truth and was never given an opportunity. God's going to show up for who he needs to show up for. I want to serve up a softball question for you, because I think there might want to kind of clarify a point here. That is, we get back to the people that were raised in a different faith tradition
Mm-hmm.
that are sincere. And is it loving for God to send those people to hell if they haven't accepted Jesus? And I just want to, you started to talk about the justice of God, and I want to flesh that out just a little bit here as we close out the interview. I want to flesh that out just a bit because, do you believe that God sends good people to hell?
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh. Well, first of all, the scripture is very clear. The only good person that ever lived on the face of the planet is Jesus. Because to be good, you have to be perfect.
So we're all not. None of us is really good. Then you're saying,
Right. And then to say that people are good means that they do good things on earth. That's really what that means. Because not everyone does good and bad things every day. So first of all, what defines good? Only God is good. And so at the end of the day, it's not, is it loving? Is it loving? That's only half the equation. Again, it's just. And we tend to want to make God what we want him to be. Dr. Geisler used to say, and he's quoting someone else, he says, God created us in his image, and we've been returning the favor ever since. And he said, what happens when you pet the cat? He does what? He purrs.
right.
Yep. He says, what happens when you pet the cat and the opposite is fur? Right?
Yeah.
In other words, culture's real happy when you're coexisting. Then, hey, listen, it's easier to say all religions leave the same place. Let's not argue about it. But that doesn't help you in eternity to be separated from God, and it doesn't help you to understand the truth. So is it a loving thing? It's loving thing from the perspective that you've rejected God's love. And if you've rejected God's love, then there's consequences. Our culture right now really is in rebellion from God's consequences and his judgment. But they can do that while they're here on earth to some extent, to great extent. See that with politicians a lot of times, above the law. See that with pastors who act in ways that they think they're above the law of the church, sometimes the law of the state or the federal laws. And you see that in our own lives, right? Sometimes we think that we're actually pretty good. And, there are days where I got to admit I'm better than others. But every day I'm a sinner, and therefore God's mercies are new every morning, and I'm grateful for that. And there are days that I have to admit where I don't do as well as I do, and I thank God for those days, because it keeps me humbly reminded that I'm an imperfect person. By the same token, my dependence is on Jesus, and I can't lose my salvation, but I certainly strive to serve Him rightfully. So, at the end of the day, is it, we can address that further, but that's the way I'd answer the question right now. Is it loving? It doesn't have to be loving. It's like saying God has many attributes. Does it have to be just one of them? Is it mean that God is just? Well, in this case, you've fallen under God's justice. But before you fell under God's justice, his love was beaming in your face. You rejected it over and over and over again. Why? Because God made you and I in his image, and we had a choice, right? We had a choice to make him into our image, or to get on bended knee, confess that we are not good, truly, and accept him and follow him and confess our sins daily and seek him rightfully. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
that's a great answer. And I want to echo what you said earlier. I will be probably doing more of these podcasts. Stephen and I talked before this interview about that. And I think we should chase that question, is truth knowable? Because you're right, that deserves its own session on that. I want to also echo what Stephen said, that if you really want to chase these points, because this has been like a very broad overview where we touched on a lot of different things very briefly. If you want to chase these, and I would encourage you to do so more in depth, I'd encourage you to get Stephen's book, All Roads Don't Lead to Heaven, where he lays all this out in a systematic way. And it's not a long book. It won't take you long to get through it. And I know people are busy today, and Stephen wrote his book with busy people in mind. So it's pretty easy to digest book. It's got some deep truths in there, but it's not tough to read. It's not like a War and Peace type thing. And I also would encourage you to read his first book that he's alluded to as well, Right for You, But Not for Me, the Is the case for moral truth? Is that the subtitle on that one?
Right for you, but not for me. A response to moral relativism.
A response to moral relativism. Okay. And that book is also a great one that really gets into the truth questions and truth issues in ways that we don't have time to really get into on this interview. But I encourage you to get both those books. And tell us, if you don't mind, as we close out, tell us all the books you've written and give us like a quick snapshot of what each one's about. And then tell us about how people can get to know your ministry, where they can go, how they can support your ministry if they would like to do that. So,
Brian, I appreciate that. So the first book is the last book you should read. I came out of seminary, Right for You, but Not for Me, A Response to Moral Relativism. And if you go to Amazon, you can see, if you go to the author's page, you'll see them all there, or just put all books by Steven Garofalo. Second book I wrote was, All Roads Don't Lead to Heaven. Basically, the meat of that book came out of, the first book. Dr. Geiser said, you have to take out at least 2 chapters. And I knew what he was saying. He was being very graceful with me. What he was saying, and I took out 4 chapters, and that became the centerpiece for the book, All Roads Don't Lead to Heaven, Discovering God in the New Age. Then we just released a little over a year ago, Equipped, Basic Training and Apologetics for Evangelism. What happens, we're answering the greatest questions, some of the greatest questions that are asked of Christians or the Christian faith. And Josh McDowell was gracious and wrote a nice foreword for that on that book. And you can get that as well. I would recommend reading All Roads first, Don't Lead to Heaven. Secondly, Equipped. And thirdly, I would recommend go ahead and then getting into the moral relativism, Right for You, but Not for Me. Now, having said that, the end of the summer, by the end of the summer, we're going to be release a new book, which is just a workbook for Equipped. And so people who want to learn that as well, we're going to have a program set up anywhere around the country to be more involved with the Reason for Truth and teaching that material. And you can go ahead, if you're interested in being part of that. You can go, and on the website, there's a Reach Us page, or you can email info@reasonfortruth.org. You can check that out. But that's going to be released here in just a few months. Real excited about that, because we really want to train you up as the listener and the watcher of this. We want to train you up to really go out and into your native environment and spread the truth.
And you have a podcast, and want to tell us a little bit about that, and then anything else you'd like to say about how people can support your ministry?
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, we have it's a Reason for Truth podcast. You can go on the reasonfortruth.org or reasonfortruth.bible, just hit the podcast button, and you can subscribe if you're an Apple user on Apple there. And then you can also go on Spreaker if you go on Spreaker if you are using an Android. But we're on a lot of different platforms, Spotify, iHeartRadio, as well. And then we have a YouTube channel, which is really good. And we'll put this up as well on the YouTube channel on MP4 for video. So we have a Wednesday release for videos. But yeah, anybody would love to support us. Boy, we'd be grateful for that. We're a very low pressure ministry. I just don't believe in making money the centerpiece, but it is a necessity running the ministry. And you can do that by going to reasonfortruth.org/donate, or just hit the donate button. We are Compliance One. Basically, it is the highest compliancy on planet Earth, on planet Earth. And so you can go in there and sign up as a one-time gift, or certainly we'd love for you to stand with us monthly, because that really is more than just financial. It's a huge encouragement to us, and it allows us to continue to do the mission we do. And we thank you for that. Thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you for your time, Stephen, on this interview. Thank you for being a part of this, and I appreciate your friendship, and all of you for tuning in. We thank you, and so I encourage you to check out Stephen's book, All Roads Don't Lead to Heaven. And I wish you a very great rest of the day. God bless you. Take care.
God bless you. Thank you, Brian.